It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. Welcome to the Happy Families podcast. So grateful to have you here and that you're choosing to spend your time with me talking about your kids and how we can make your family happier. Kids are probably, if your children are anything like mine, showing up at home hungry after school, then you discover that they gave their lunch to somebody else because they didn't like it, or worse, they threw it in the bin, and you're sort of thinking, number one, it costs a lot of money to do this, to provide lunches. But number two, do you think that I've got time to sit around in the morning and make you a lunch that you're not going to eat? I mean, this is the challenge with kids. Or alternatively, they're just complaining and whinging and whining and they're saying, I don't like anything. Today, I'm having a conversation with Deb Blakely, the founder, director and lead accredited practicing dietitian of Kids Dig Food. You can find everything that you need to know about Deb and Kids Dig Food at kidsdigfood.com.au. Deb followed her heart, I think would be the easiest way to say this, like just loves this work, and created Kids Dig Food in 2013. It's been 10 years now, after many years as a community dietitian, community nutritionist, and a hospital-based clinical dietitian. And Deb has essentially become passionate about supporting grown-ups to positively and joyfully connect or reconnect with food and eating, and share this with the children that they care for. Now, Deb, I love food and I love sharing food. My children don't appreciate the way that I do. I don't know if you've noticed this, but kids, they're happy to eat the cheap ice cream, whereas when we get a bit older, we start to avoid the cheap stuff. We just go for the good stuff, right? Like our taste buds have matured. We know what's good and what's not. But kids, we sort of say they'll eat anything, and then it comes to school lunchboxes and they won't eat anything at all. Why is school lunch so challenging for so many families?
Yes, eating at school is really different to eating in other places. And there's a lot to think about for kids when they're eating at school. So it might to us seem like, oh, I've given you the lunch, it's come home, it's either not eaten or it's all gone, and you're saying you're hungry. And there's different routines and expectations. And as we know, there's often less time to eat. So sometimes kids are only given 10 minutes maybe to get their lunch done. And depending on the child, that may or may not be enough time. And if they're a bit of a chatterbox, then that might get in the way of eating as well. Or if they're more interested in play. So it can be really helpful to work out what the environment in the school is like around lunches, what the routine is like, because it can take a little bit of problem solving with your child and maybe with the school and with the teachers to work out what's going on sometimes.
We had a situation, so one of our kids got ADHD, and we had a situation where she just said, I haven't got time. But what we realised is she was just so busy. As soon as the bell went, she had so many things that she needed to do in that little period of time, because she knew that she'd be back in the classroom soon, and she wanted to run and play and talk to friends and do everything. And eating was such a low priority. Of course, kids, especially kids who have any kind of additional needs, when they're not eating, they become even more difficult to manage. And we kept on trying to say to her, kiddo, you need to eat the food. Like, we packed it for you. You've got to do it. You've got to eat first. But they just don't want to. And I remember having a conversation some years ago with one teacher. She was essentially saying, making sure that all 28 kids in my class eat their lunch is one thing that I just can't promise that I can do. I'm sympathetic to that. But like you said, we have this perfect world where we think, okay, we'll have a conversation with the teacher and everything will be okay. Doesn't always work like that.
No, it certainly doesn't. And I think the teacher's right that, you know, it can actually be quite unrealistic to say to a teacher, you know,
please feed my child.
Make sure my kid eats.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. I get it.
So there's a lot of other things that we can do, and kids with special needs, for example, your daughter who isn't eating or wasn't eating very much, you know, sometimes they do need a bit more support around that. And that support can look really different in many different ways. But let's take a broader approach and say, you know, we've got a typically developing child or a child who might have special needs where you just think, you know, they're just not paying attention. There's something getting in the way for them. So some of the things we can do from the home perspective is do a bit of problem solving and go, okay, so tell me what's going on. What do you really want to be doing? Like what happens in that 10 minutes? And can we problem solve together? You know, depending on the child's age, it can be possible to problem solve together and say, okay, well, if we put something in your lunchbox that literally took you 30 seconds to eat, just so that to make sure that you're having something at each break to keep you going. What would that be? Do you think that might be possible for you? So really working with our kids to decide what it is, is it just their favorite piece of cheese on cracker, or something that's quite small, quite energy dense, that they're going to be able to eat really quickly? That might be just that thing that gets them through. The other thing I want to mention is that sometimes eating at school might be the smallest amount of eating that your child does during the day. And it may be that we need to help them by supplementing breakfast and supplementing afternoon tea and dinner and maybe supper to make up for that. So just because a child isn't eating as much as we would like them to be eating during the day, doesn't mean that we can't get them to meet their needs across the whole day. Where teachers can be helpful, I think, is establish some rules that we don't throw food away. That if there's anything that's uneaten in your lunchbox, it's best to take that home with you, because then you as parents have a better idea of what's actually being eaten and what's not. And some of the dialogue that might happen is around, okay, so I can see that there's a lot coming back. What's that about? Is it about the fact that I just wanted to go and play, or is it that I hate everything that's in here? Because that then both of those things require a lot of problem solving, as a parent. And then from the teacher's perspective, there may be some ways that they can help the children be as settled as they can possibly be in that 10 minutes.
I'd love to steer the conversation in a different direction now. Obviously, you had that webinar with your community and you were talking about the challenge of school lunchboxes. How do we put lunchboxes together that are nutritious and that the kids will eat and that won't go bad in the hot sun at this time of the year? I know that whenever I look at news articles about the average school student lunchbox, the articles are usually highly critical and saying these things are full of sugar. It's white bread, it's jam or Vegemite or peanut butter or something else that's full of sugar. There's a popper which is full of sugar. There's a couple of snacks which are full of sugar. And essentially everything that I've ever read about school lunchboxes seems to indicate that all of our typical, traditional, standard, quick and easy lunch options tend to be less than ideal for our kids. What do you recommend parents do here?
I really find the dialogue around sugar, particularly the things that you mentioned, quite problematic as a dietitian, because, some of the things you mentioned, like white bread, for example, fruit, those foods provide an amazing amount of nutrients. So, for example, if you've got a child who really at the moment their staple for bread is white bread, they don't like wholemeal bread, school is not the time really to be stretching our kids.
I love that you said that. I love that you said that, because as you said at the beginning of the conversation, it's a different situation. We've got a completely different context. There's limited or little or if any adult supervision, and the kids have got so many other distractions and so much else going on.
Yeah,
school's not the place where they're going to experiment with food, right?
Yeah, and look, you might have a super experimental kid, and you're probably not listening to this podcast if you do, because you don't have any problems then. But when we're thinking about what are going to be foods that fill our kids up, that get them through, we do need to rely on foods that are familiar to them.
Yeah.
Okay. So, some of the foods that are demonized in a lot of media, particularly where lunchboxes are concerned, I would think as a dietitian are perfectly acceptable. So sandwiches with white bread, fruit. What else did you mention, Justin?
Oh, I mentioned a few of the school snacks and the popper, the pure apple juice popper.
A juice popper. Those foods, kids actually require a lot of carbohydrate. I think that this is what we forget as parents and people who have a very limited view of nutrition in the sense that everything has to be healthy. That's a topic for another podcast, but really, if we can put food into our kids' lunchboxes that are familiar, look good, smell good, taste good to them, are quick to eat, they're going to be foods that they're more likely to eat. When it comes to keeping food safe, in terms of food safety, there's real value in supporting our kids to understand if you've got, say, a ham sandwich or something that is going to go off, maybe you've got an egg in there, so, protein food or whatever, anything that's kind of wet, is likely to, not be great, or maybe a yogurt or some cheese, that those foods might be better eaten at the first break rather than the second break. And that's a really good skill for kids to learn. So although we don't really want to be saying, well, you must eat this food first because it's the healthy one, I would take the view that anything that you put in your child's lunchbox, let them eat it in whatever order they want to. If you weren't happy for them to have it, it wouldn't go in the lunchbox in the first place. That's okay to do. And even, training your kid to go, pick the bit that's not going to be really, get the sun on it, We want our kids to obviously have a lunch that they're going to want to eat when they come to second break.
So, Deb, as I listen to what you're saying here, and our time's pretty well up, so we need to wrap this. If I was to summarize, what I'm hearing you essentially say is kids can be a little bit tricky around food at school because of the environment, because of the stimulus, because there's so much going on, and because there's a lack of supervision. In terms of the actual foods that they eat, I'm hearing you sound extremely practical and pragmatic. And what I'm basically hearing you say is, on average, don't sweat the small stuff. Just make sure that they're eating. And I've jotted down a few things that you said as we were talking. You said sandwiches, cheese, yogurt, fruit, salad, snacks. The popper is fine as well. I've thrown wraps in as well, because what kid doesn't like wraps? It sounds as if we might be making a bigger deal about school lunches than we need to.
Yeah, and even, throw some crunchy foods in there. Even if it is a packet crunchy food, if it's a carbohydrate-based snack, those foods actually, there's a sensory feedback that we get from eating crunchy foods. So crunchy foods, particularly towards the end of the day when kids are flagging, can really help wake them up, like physically wake them up.
What's an example of a crunchy food? Are you talking like a violet crumble crunch?
Well, it could be, although, many people might not feel like they want to put that.
Sure.
Maybe you want to save that for home. But, any kind of packet, cracker or something that your kid enjoys. There's so many of those kinds of things out there. Obviously, fruit and veggies provide crunch, but if your kid isn't a good fruit and veggie eater, it is okay to put some of these other foods in there. And we may not necessarily want to be totally filling the lunchbox with those foods if we can help it. But I'm speaking really honestly and openly and compassionately to a lot of the families that I work with where kids have a really limited food range. So work within your child's food range. If you can't put every food group in there, do the best you can. And if your child's lunchbox is looking pretty bland and pretty basic, communicate that with your teacher and explain why. Because I know that you're probably doing the very best you can to work at expanding food range in other environments, at home, at school. We just need to get them fed.
I like that. Kids just actually need to be fed because they'll be better learners. They'll be better kids if they've got food in their belly. Deb Blakely is the founder, director and lead accredited practicing dietitian of Kids Dig Food. You can find out more at kidsdigfood.com.au. And Deb, the webinar that you shared with your community, I presume that's online. Can we have people who want to hear more, they can visit your website, kidsdigfood.com.au, to find the webinar?
Yeah, absolutely. So on our resources page, there's a link to our online platform, and the webinar, a recording of the webinar will be there, along with some other things. Perfect.
Really appreciate the conversation. I have a number of other questions that I want to ask you as a result of our chat today. So we'll have to get you back on the podcast. Have a great day, and thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Justin.
That's Deb Blakely, accredited practicing dietitian and the founder of Kids Dig Food. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rule. I'm from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information, check out Deb's website or visit happyfamilies.com.au.